Mountain man broke into her barn for shelter. The widowed rancher pointed a gun, then froze when he whispered her name. Colorado Territory, September 1873. The wind came hard off the mesa that night, dry and wild, tearing through the cottonwoods and rattling the loose tin atop the barn. Rain chased it, sharp needles from the west, pounding the hard earth like hoofbeats from a war long over but not forgotten. Maribel Quinn stood in the doorway of her dim kitchen, a kerosene lamp flickering in her hand. The house was silent except for the soft, even breaths of her sleeping children. Ben, 7, asleep with a wooden horse clutched tight. Clara, 5, curled under her quilt like a kitten. And little Ruthie, barely 2, still in the crib her father never got to finish carving. A crack sounded, wood on wood, sharp and low, from the barn. The cattle were restless. She could feel it in the ground, in the way the rain had shifted. But this was not just weather. Maribel grabbed her shotgun from the wreck. Her boots hit the porch hard. Wind pulled at her dress as she crossed the yard, the rain already soaking through her shoulders. Another thud, then a groan. She did not hesitate. She kicked the barn door open, lantern in one hand, barrel raised in the other. Inside, the cows shifted nervously. Something moved near the back wall. Slow, human. "Don't move," she said, voice cold, steady. "I'll shoot." A figure staggered into the lantern light, coat torn, beard thick, rainwater dripping from his brow. He looked half dead. She cocked the gun. Then he looked up. "Mari," he rasped. "It's me. I kept the ring." The lantern trembled in her hand. She stepped back. "No. Mari." He took a step forward, then collapsed to his knees in the hay. She stared at him. Mud. Blood. Beard. The years had carved new shadows into his face, but the eyes, brown and burning, had not changed. "Jonas Reyes died 11 years ago," she said. He coughed, tried to rise. "I didn't die. You disappeared. Left me, left your family, left me standing in a church with a ring in my hand and no name to curse." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled something wrapped in cloth, held it out. She didn't move. He opened it anyway. A small silver ring, worn smooth but still whole. "I kept it," he whispered, "every day." She lifted the gun again, stepped closer. "You don't get to walk in out of the dark and speak my name like it's still yours." She pressed the barrel to his chest. "You're not real." "No, you're a ghost, a lying ghost who wants something." "I want nothing." "Good," she snapped, "because you'll get nothing." She turned and slammed the door shut behind her. There was a heavy metal bar leaning by the hay bales. She dropped it across the latch, locked him in, turned her back on the barn and the storm and the man who should have stayed dead. Behind her, his voice was faint through the wood. "I kept the ring." She didn't stop walking, not even when her hands began to shake. By morning the storm had passed, leaving a stillness that felt unnatural. Clouds hung low over the hills like bruises on a pale sky. The earth smelled of wet hay and old regrets. Maribel stood on the porch, shotgun across her arms, eyes fixed on the barn. She had not slept. The children were inside, eating porridge, unaware that a ghost from her past was locked behind wood and iron just 30 yards away. When she finally opened the barn door, Jonas was awake, sitting against the far wall, arms resting on his knees. He looked like something carved out of the mountain, older than time, but somehow familiar. She didn't speak at first. Neither did he. Then, sharp as a blade, she broke the silence. "Why?" He looked up. Why are you alive?" she demanded. Why didn't you come back? Why let me bury you and marry someone else and raise 3 children, thinking you were bones in the dirt?" Jonas took a breath. "Because I thought it was better that way." "Better?" she snapped. "Better for who?" He stood slowly, wincing from stiffness. "Your father took me up the canyon. Said we were scouting land he wanted to file for claims before the railroad came through. I didn't question him." Mirabelle's mouth tightened. "He told me to take a closer look at the ravine. When I leaned forward, he shoved me." Her breath caught. "I hit the rocks, hard. Cracked my head, shoulders shattered. I don't know how long I lay there, but it was the Cheyenne who found me. Dragged me out. I couldn't speak for nearly 2 years. Couldn't even say your name. Why didn't you come back after that?" she said, voice thin. "I wanted to, every day. But your father had already buried a casket with my name on it. I saw the marker, heard the stories." She clenched her fists. "He told me you ran, that you were a coward, that you'd taken money from him and vanished." Jonas shook his head. He was claiming the land, the mineral rights. "If I returned, I'd be ruining the name of the man you still call Daddy. I couldn't do that to you. You think I would have chosen his name over your life?" "I didn't know," he said softly. "You were 21. I was just a name carved on stone." Maribel stared at him, breath shaky. "And now?" "I heard James was gone," Jonas said. "Shot on the trail home from court. I waited a year, but then I thought maybe I owed it to you, to see if you were okay, maybe say goodbye properly." "Goodbye?" she spat. "You think you get to say goodbye?" He stepped forward slowly, reaching into his coat again. "I found something before I came." He held out a small cloth bundle. She recognized it instantly. It was the same muslin she'd wrapped the ring in, the same spot she'd buried it beneath the old cottonwood, the day she said goodbye to the man who never got to be her husband. Jonas unwrapped it. The ring still gleamed faintly in the gray light. Simple, silver, carved with the word "always" on the inside band. "I dug it up," he said. "Thought I'd lost my right to give it, but I never lost the promise." Something broke in her chest. She walked forward and, in one motion, slapped him hard across the face. The sound cracked in the still barn air. He didn't flinch, didn't speak. Tears shimmered in her eyes, rage and pain fighting for space in her heart. "I waited 3 years," she whispered. 3 years, Jonas. Then I married a good man, not because I stopped loving you, but because I couldn't keep dying every day." He looked down. "I know. And now you come back. With a ring. With stories. Like it all still belongs." "I don't want anything from you, Mari," he said. "I just wanted you to know I never stopped loving you." She stared at him a moment longer, then turned and walked out of the barn. The ring stayed in his hand. His fingers curled around it slowly. Outside, her children were laughing in the yard. She paused on the porch, her breath shaky, hand gripping the railing until her knuckles went white. Ghosts did not weep, but somehow she felt one dying inside her all the same. The storm lingered through the night, growling low across the plains like something that had not made peace with the land. Maribel sat at the window long after the children had gone to bed, the shotgun across her lap and the lamp turned down low. Outside, the barn stood like a shadow against the lightning flashes, and inside it, a man she once thought she would die loving slept wrapped in hay and silence. By dawn, the clouds had pulled apart, exposing a sky scrubbed raw and pale. She walked the perimeter as she did every morning, boots heavy with mud. When she reached the southern fence line, her steps slowed. The section that had been sagging for weeks, where the post had split near the base, was now braced, lashed tight with new rope, and a carved beam cut from their own woodpile. Her brows furrowed. Back at the barn, the floor had been swept, fresh straw laid down, and the tools she had scattered in frustration days ago were stacked with almost soldierly order. She did not speak of it when he came to the back porch, hands raw and eyes lowered, nor when he ate breakfast with her children, sitting at the edge of the table like a man who knew his place had long since been taken. Ben, her eldest, eyed him curiously. "You got bear scars?" Jonas smiled, just a little. "Maybe. Did you ever shoot a real one?" "No," Jonas said, his voice low. "I learned it's better not to make enemies out of what just wants to be left alone." Ben nodded solemnly, like it was scripture. Clara kept her eyes on her plate, but later Marivelle found the girl had drawn him in her sketchbook, bearded, tall, and with kind eyes. Ruthie, the youngest, said only one thing when he gently pushed a bowl of porridge toward her. "Papa?" The room froze. Maribel's spoon paused in mid-air. Her heart lurched. Jonas cleared his throat. "No, little miss. I'm just the bear." Ruthie giggled, and the moment passed, but Maribel didn't taste a thing for the rest of the meal. Jonas stayed. He did not ask him to. He built a woodshed they'd needed since spring, fixed the leak above the root cellar, chopped enough firewood to last 3 winters. Each evening he sat near the fence, watching the children play, as if trying to memorize the light in their hair. He watched him through the kitchen window and hated the way her chest ached. One afternoon, Ben begged Jonas to show him how to build a snare. Jonas agreed with a quiet nod. They walked out behind the pasture, just the two of them. When they came back, Ben was grinning, dirt on his knees, a small rabbit dangling from a string. "He says it's not about the catch," Ben told her breathlessly. "It's about the patience." That night, Ben fell asleep with the snare tucked beneath his pillow. 2 days later, it happened. Maribel was pulling laundry from the line, eyes on the horizon where storm clouds threatened again. Clara was helping rinse jars by the trough. Ruthie had wandered to the edge of the irrigation ditch, a thin stream swollen from last week's rains. Maribel didn't see it. But Jonas did. He was on the roof, hammer in hand, when he looked down and saw the little girl tip too far. The slick bank gave way. She tumbled in. He didn't shout. He didn't waste a second. He vaulted from the roof, hit the ground hard, sprinted. By the time Maribel turned, Ruthie was gone. By the time she dropped the laundry, Jonas had plunged into the ditch. She reached the bank as he emerged, soaked and shivering, Ruthie coughing in his arms. He cradled her gently, whispering, "You're all right. You're all right now." Maribel fell to her knees. Tears came fast, sharp, hot against her cheeks. The last time she had cried was the night they buried James, and even then it had been quiet. Now it was not. She sobbed, hands trembling, heart pounding like a runaway horse. Jonas stood in the shallows, rain dripping from his beard, the little girl wrapped tight to his chest. He didn't look at Maribel. He didn't need to. She saw him, all of him. Not a ghost, not a mistake, but a man who had never stopped choosing her, even from the edges of the world. The wheat fields glowed gold under the mid-autumn sun, rose bending gently as the wind rolled over them like a passing memory. Maribel walked with a sickle in hand, boots thick with soil, sweat glistening on her brow. Jonas worked a few paces ahead, sleeves rolled, forearms bronzed, steady and silent, like he had been born to harvest. They had not spoken much that morning, but something had shifted. They moved in rhythm now, not lovers, not yet friends, but something deeper, something like understanding. At midday, Clara brought out bread and water in a basket. She lingered beside Jonas longer than usual. Maribel noticed. That night, as they kneaded dough together in the kitchen, Maribel caught herself smiling at a joke he made about burnt biscuits. She quickly looked away, but the smile had already lived. Later that week, Clara came home from school with her braid undone and eyes red. Maribel pulled her aside, gently coaxing the story out. "A girl said we were charity, that Pa's dead and we're just poor folk with no name." Maribel's throat tightened. Before she could reply, Jonas knelt beside Clara, one hand on her shoulder. "You're not charity," he said, "and your name has more strength in it than most men I've known." She said, "Her pa owns the mill." Jonas smiled faintly. "And does she know how to ride, or how to find north without a compass?" Clara shook her head. "Then you win." She giggled. "But what if she pushes me again?" "Then you speak," he said, "not with your fists, with truth. Say, 'My father was a man who defended the law. My mother works harder than any man, and the man who watches over me now never turned his back when I needed him.'" Clara stared at him. "That's a lot to say." "Then just stand tall," Jonas said. "The wind does the rest." That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Maribel found Jonas standing in the kitchen, eyes fixed on a photo nailed above the hearth. It was old, edges curled, color fading, but still clear. Maribel, younger, hair loose, eyes bright. Jonas beside her, arm just barely brushing hers. Both of them laughing at something the photographer had said. She had forgotten it was still there. He did not turn when she entered. "Remember that day," he said softly. "You wore that red dress because you said the sky looked too pale. I was young." "No," he said. "You were luminous." Maribel leaned against the doorway. "You always did speak prettier than a preacher when you were cornered." He smiled without humor. "I never stopped loving you." Keeping view of Manhattan, she did not move. "But I was too late. Too far. Too broken. I didn't come back to claim anything. No. I came to see if the light was still in your eyes." She looked at him then, full in the face. He had changed, weathered, marked by years of silence and survival. But there it was. The same look from that photograph. The same man. She walked past him, poured water into a basin, stared at the sink. "I didn't stop loving you either," she said quietly. "I just learned to hate you more than I missed you." Jonas turned slowly. She looked back over her shoulder. "That hate got me through the births, through the funerals, through all the nights the roof leaked and no one was there to fix it." She paused. "And still, somewhere between grief and grit, I kept that red dress." The room filled with stillness, not silence, but something heavier. Jonas crossed the floor. He did not touch her, just stood close enough for her to feel the warmth. "I would give anything," he said, "to go back and not fall." "You did fall," she whispered, "and I buried you." "I know." They stood there, between bread and photographs, between what was and what could never quite be again. But outside, the wind had shifted. And inside, she was no longer sure if she wanted it to stop. The clouds that gathered that week weren't the kind that brought rain. They were dry and high, burned silver at the edges, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. People in town spoke softer, doors closed earlier, and Maribel Quinn felt the wind carry something mean across the fields. It arrived in the form of a man with polished boots and a silver-tipped cane. Clay Devlin. He rode into her yard with two men behind him and a smirk beneath his mustache. The horses were clean, the guns were visible, and the intent was plain. "You must be Maribel Quinn," he said, doffing his hat like he was greeting a widow at a tea party. Maribel stood on the porch, arms folded, Jonas at her side. The children watched from the window. "This is private land," she said, voice like cut stone. "That's the issue," Devlin replied, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "You're not the rightful owner." Arabella didn't take the paper. "That land's been in my family 20 years. "Yes? Ever since your dear father filed the claim." He stepped closer, voice lowering. "But here's the problem. That claim was forged." She flinched. Jonas stiffened beside her. Devlin offered the document. "This here is a verified grant, signed by the Territorial Land Office. I acquired it fair and legal, which means this ranch belongs to me." Jonas stepped forward. "That's a lie." Devlin tilted his head. "And who are you? The new husband? The hired help?" Jonas didn't answer. Devlin's smile turned sharp. "I'm giving you 1 week, Miss Quinn. Pack your things. Sell your stock. Make peace with the dirt." He looked at Jonas. "Or you can bury another man on it." With that, he tipped his hat and turned. The sound of hooves faded down the road. Inside the house, Clara was crying. Ben paced. Ruthie clung to her doll. Maribel sat at the table, the paper now open before her, her father's handwriting forged into permanence. "I knew he'd done things," she whispered. "But I didn't know this." Jonas stood by the window, fists clenched. "We can leave," he said. "I can take you and the children over the pass. I know men in the Black Hills. We can start again." Maribel looked up, eyes blazing. "No." "Maribel, this land is where my mother's buried, where my babies were born, where I became strong. I'm not handing it over to a man who buys fear and sells lies." Jonas moved to her. "If we stay, they will come back." "Then let 'em." He stared at her a long moment, then nodded once. That night, after the children were asleep, Jonas saddled the mule and left. He did not tell her where he was going. She knew. Clay Devlin's ranch sat 3 miles south of the river. White fences, brick chimney, dogs trained to hate strangers. Jonas Reyes walked in with no gun. He carried only a bottle of whiskey and a folded letter. The guards met him at the gate. "I'm here to talk." "You got death in your voice," one said. "I've got truth." They brought him inside. Devlin sat by the fire, boots up, reading the paper like a man already owned the world. Jonas placed the whiskey on the table. "You're a man who buys men, buys documents, thinks owning a thing means earning it." Devlin raised an eyebrow. "You're not a lawyer, Reyes." "No, but I loved the woman your greed is trying to break." Devlin stood. "So what? You came to plead?" Jonas reached into his coat, pulled out a single sheet. "This is a statement, signed by men who worked with Judge Quinn. One of them saw him forge the deed. He's ready to testify." Devlin's smile vanished. Jonas stepped closer. "Walk away, leave her alone, or I take this to Denver and burn you in front of every land court from here to Cheyenne." Devlin moved like a viper. The cane came first, striking Jonas across the ribs, then fists, then boots. They left him in the mud outside the gate, face bloodied, ribs cracked, paper torn. Maribel sat on the porch until nearly dawn. When the horse came into view, limping, Jonas slumped over the saddle. Her breath left her body. She ran. He slid to the ground, barely conscious. "Wait!" she cried, holding his face, brushing mud and blood from his cheek. His voice was raw. "Because you said you wouldn't leave." "I had to prove I wouldn't either." She sobbed then, not from fear, but from the weight of something finally returned. Not a man, but a vow remade, in blood and broken bone. They carried Jonas in at dusk, Ben on one side, Maribel on the other, his blood soaking the front of her dress. He drifted in and out of consciousness, skin cold, breath shallow, mumbling names from a world she could not follow. She laid him in the parlor, close to the fire, where the children would not see. Clara had started to cry again. Ruthie clung to Maribel's skirt, whispering, "Is the bear hurt?" "Yes," Maribel said, stroking her daughter's hair. "But he's strong." After settling the children upstairs, she returned to him. His shirt was torn, 3 ribs bruised, maybe cracked. A gash near his temple bled slow and steady. She cleaned it with trembling hands, pressing a cloth to the wound, whispering prayers she had not said in years. He flinched in his fever. "Mari," he murmured. "I'm here," she said, brushing sweat from his brow. "You're safe." The oil lamp flickered low. Outside, the wind stirred dust against the windows, but she didn't move. Hours passed. She changed the compress, re-wet the cloth, sat by his side as the fire burned to coals. At some point near dawn, she noticed a folded paper peeking from his coat pocket. She hesitated, then pulled it free. It was a letter, handwritten, unsent. "Maribel, when the wheat's in and the children have enough firewood for winter, I'll go. Not because I want to, but because I know the shadow I carry. You loved a boy who never came home. I am not him anymore, and you deserve peace, not reminders." Her hands trembled. "You were always the light. I only ever tried to follow it home." The paper slipped from her fingers. She pressed her palms to her face and wept. Not the bitter, angry tears she had known before, but something softer, something born of memory and release. She leaned close to him, voice catching. "You fool," she whispered. "You think you brought the shadow? I carried it every day. You never left me. I just buried you too soon." She kissed his knuckles, held his hand. And in that still hour before sunrise, he stirred. His fingers curled around hers, his eyes blinked open, glassy, confused, then focused. "You said," he rasped, barely audible. "I meant it," she whispered. "Every word." His eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak again, but no sound came. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. They stayed like that, breath to breath, grief to grief, love long lost and finally found, until the sun broke through the clouds. And for the first time in over a decade they saw each other not as ghosts of who they had been, but as people still alive. It took weeks to gather the evidence, longer still to convince the judge in Fort Lyon to hear it. But Maribel and Jonas went together, papers wrapped in oilskin, truth written in calloused hands, and signed by the last honest man who had once worked under her father. The court session was brief. Clay Devlin did not even appear. The verdict? The deed had been falsified. Maribel Quinn was the rightful owner of every acre her mother once sowed with wildflower seeds. They rode home in silence, dust kicking up behind the wagon. But inside Maribel, something bloomed, steadier than relief, gentler than victory. It felt like choosing. The ranch settled into a rhythm. Jonas built a lean-to by the river, took Ben out each morning to track deer prints, show him how to read wind and listen for birdsong. Clara, once quiet, began asking questions again, about rivers, rocks, and stars. Ruthie followed Jonas like a duckling, tugging his coat and calling him Bear. At night, they read aloud from old books James once kept in a trunk. Jonas's voice filled the parlor with stories, and the children drifted to sleep as if nothing in the world had ever broken. Maribel watched it all unfold from the kitchen, her hands kneading dough, heart pulsing not with fear, but with a strange, aching joy. Jonas never asked for a place. He never once pressed her for more than she could give. He simply stayed. repaired things that did not ask to be fixed, built trust one silent kindness at a time. One evening, as the last light bled from the sky, she found him on the porch, Ruthie asleep in his lap, the wind stirring his hair. He looked up when she stepped outside. "She wanted to hear about elk," he whispered, "but I only made it to squirrels." Maribel knelt beside him, brushing a lock of hair from Ruthie's brow. "You didn't come back for me," she said. He blinked, unsure. "You came back for them, for what you missed." He nodded. "I came back because I couldn't stand not knowing if you were all right. But I stayed because this time I wanted to do it right." She took a breath. The sky was lavender behind them, the sound of insects rising like soft applause. "I lost you once," she said. "But now I get to choose again." Jonas waited. She smiled, eyes wet. "And I choose to stay." Spring came late that year, but when it arrived it did so in color. Bluebells along the riverbanks, sun-soaked wheat fields, warm winds rushing down from the mesa like laughter unbottled after a long, hard winter. Maribel Quinn stood before the mirror in her mother's dress. Ivory muslin faded at the edges, sleeves embroidered with tiny roses, stitched by hands long gone. She hadn't worn a dress like this since she was a girl, certainly not since she'd become a widow, and never with a smile. The town square buzzed with life, bunting strung between porch posts, children racing with ribbons, fiddlers tuning up behind the bakery. It was the spring jubilee, the first in 2 years since Devlin's threat had quieted half the town. Now, with his claim thrown out and his influence receding like a bad drought, joy had returned. Jonas stood off to the side near the pie table, hair combed back, shirt crisp, one of Ruthie's flower crowns hanging crookedly from his shoulder. He looked like he was ready to disappear into the crowd again, until Maribel stepped onto the platform. People stilled. She didn't take the mic, didn't ask permission. She just reached for Jonas's hand. "Come up here." He blinked. "Mari." She pulled him forward. "Please." He followed, cautious, eyes scanning the crowd. Maribel turned to face the people of their town, the neighbors who had watched her break and rebuild, the children who once pitied her kids, the men who had once looked past her like she was empty. Her voice was clear. 20 years ago, she began, I lost someone I loved. The story was that he ran, or died, or maybe both. Jonas looked down. She smiled at him. I held on to that loss like a ghost. Married a good man, buried him too soon, raised children in the wind, built a life with my bare hands and my mother's prayers. The crowd was silent, breaths held in the breeze. She turned fully to Jonas. But then a man came back, a man who did not ask for my love or for a place. He asked for nothing, only gave. Jonas's eyes shimmered. Maribel reached into her pocket and dropped to one knee. Gasps rippled through the square. "Jonas Reyes," she said, her voice catching. "Will you marry me?" The wind rushed through at just that moment, lifting her hair and stirring the petals beneath their feet. Jonas stared at her, lips parted, stunned silent. Then he nodded, once, sharp, sure, and pulled her up into his arms. The crowd erupted in cheers. Ben whooped loud enough to startle the horses. Clara cried into her friend's shoulder. Ruthie clapped with both hands and shouted, "Bear said yes!" Jonas didn't kiss her then, not in front of all those eyes, but his forehead pressed to hers, and that was more sacred than anything the town had seen in years. They didn't waste time with plans or waiting. The wedding was set for the next full moon, but in the days that followed, they lived like it had already happened. Jonas rode fence lines with Ben, helped Clara plant squash and roses. built Ruthie a wooden swing with carvings of birds only she could name. Maribel watched him, and for once didn't think of what had been lost, only what had finally returned. On a Sunday morning, just before the first harvest, they saddled up all 5 horses. Ben on his bay gelding, Clara proud on her chestnut, Ruthie tucked into Jonah's saddle, arms around his waist. Maribel led them across the golden fields, the sun high and warm, the wheat alive with wind. The sky stretched wide, the trail bent toward the east. Jonas reached for her hand across the gap between their horses. She took it. As they rode through the shimmering sea of green and gold, her mother's dress rippling behind her, the silver ring Jonas had once buried, caught the light. It blazed for a moment, sun on metal, love on memory. And behind them, the dust rose gently. The past, at last, had settled. And in its place rode something stronger. A woman who had bent without breaking. A man who had waited without promise. And a love that had risen from the ground it was once buried in. Thank you for riding with us through The Gun, the Ghost, and the Guilt, a story of buried promises, wind-swept redemption, and a love strong enough to outlive silence, time, and the scars of betrayal. If this tale moved you, if Maribel's strength and Jonas's quiet devotion stayed with you, then you belong here, among stories where the heart never surrenders. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more unforgettable romances forged in the dust, danger, and beauty of the American frontier. New stories every week, because out here, where the wind still remembers, so do we.